Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. The Triwizard tournament is a dangerous competition where each participant represents their school, showcasing magical prowess through a series of perilous tasks. Harry Potter was unwillingly thrust into this tournament, and we followed his journey not only through his eyes, but also through the perspectives of other characters. Yet despite the thrilling plot and intense atmosphere, the tournament is riddled with oddities and logical gaps. Today, we'll explore the most questionable and mysterious aspects of this magical contest. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Why bring the tournament back at all? Let's start from the beginning. The Triwizard tournament was cancelled in 1792 after a basilisk attacked the judges and school heads. 2 centuries passed. What motivated the organisers to revive such a dangerous event in 1994? Weren't there safer, more engaging ways to foster relationships between schools? For instance, an inter-school Quidditch championship, traditional, thrilling, and far less deadly. Who decided a potentially lethal competition was the right kind of bonding experience for teenagers? Number 2, what's in it for the audience? Hogwarts cancelled its regular Quidditch Cup this year in favour of the tournament. That decision raised many eyebrows. Quidditch brings excitement, unity, and house pride. It makes the school year vibrant. Now let's view the tournament from the audience's perspective. The first task, spectacular, dragons, action, suspense. The second task, viewers stared at the surface of the lake for an hour, having no clue what was going on. The third task, a maze, completely closed off from view. Shouldn't the tournament, advertised as the magical event of the year, have been more accessible to spectators? Why didn't anyone think of magical broadcasts or ways to involve the public more directly? Number 3, why cancel Quidditch entirely? This naturally follows from the previous point. Why couldn't they have run both the tournament and the Quidditch Cup in parallel? They barely overlap. Even if Harry and Cedric were involved in both, that's hardly a reason to cancel an entire season. Sure, the book's plot focuses on the tournament, but from a logical standpoint, depriving students of their favourite sport is questionable. A few tweaks to the calendar could have solved the problem. Number 4, the loophole in the binding magical contract. Now, to the so-called magical contract. According to the rules, once a name is submitted into the goblet, the chosen individual must compete. Harry didn't submit his name, yet he was selected and magically bound. But let's recall Fleur Delacour in the second task. She fails and drops out. In the third task, any champion can raise a red spark and forfeit. How does that square with the binding contract? If anyone can drop out at any stage without facing magical consequences, why all the ominous talk about being forced to compete? Number 5. What if Harry had refused? Let's imagine Harry had actually refused to participate. What would have happened? He didn't submit his name. He didn't consciously enter into any agreement. That means the magical binding was triggered by someone else's actions. Can a magical contract even work without the participant's consent? Logically, the burden should fall on whoever submitted the name, not the victim. But Harry is forced to compete as if he signed up himself. That's a glaring inconsistency. Number 6, the registration system. The tournament's registration system is absurdly basic. Drop your name in the goblet and wait. But what if someone else tosses in your name? Say, Draco Malfoy convinces a senior student to sneak in Harry's name. Why doesn't the goblet verify handwriting or magical signatures? Why doesn't it check who submitted the name? It would make far more sense if it only accepted entries directly from the individuals, and only those aged 17 or older. As it stands, anyone can sign up anyone else for a deadly magical competition. Number 7, only one winner? Cedric Diggory swam faster than anyone in the second task. He cracked the dragon riddle without panicking in the first. Judges praised his poise and skill. Fleur was elegant, focused, magical. Crumb showed brutal efficiency, but when it came to the final task, none of that mattered. The winner would be whoever touched the cup first. Months of scoring effort, near-death escapes, all reduced to a race through a maze. One wrong turn, and everything a champion had done was forgotten. Points don't matter anymore. Moody, really? Barty Crouch Jr. had told Harry. And that said everything. There was no tiebreaker system, no cumulative score, no weight to consistency. The entire tournament rested on a single moment. Cedric and Harry both reached the cup together. They agreed to share the glory, but only one came back. "Take my body back, will you?" Cedric said seconds before Voldemort murdered him. In a fair system, Cedric might have won outright, or shared victory in a meaningful way. But the tournament wasn't built to reward merit, only spectacle, only finality, and it cost a life. Number 8. Adults. Indifference to danger. The first dragon roared, shaking the stadium. Students screamed. Professors stood calmly, watching as a child flew on a broomstick, just meters from snapping jaws. This was not a simulation. This was a Hungarian horntail, one of the most dangerous magical creatures alive. And yet no one seemed truly alarmed. Not Dumbledore, not Madame Maxime, not Karkaroff. They watched as if this were a school play. When Harry survived, the crowd cheered, not out of relief, but entertainment. The danger wasn't questioned, it was applauded. No parents stormed the gates, not even Molly Weasley, who'd wept when Harry broke an arm playing Quidditch. No official stepped in to challenge the ethics of it all. And this wasn't the first time. The Triwizard tournament was famously suspended for being too deadly. "Too many deaths," Dumbledore once said, and still they brought it back, with dragons, deep-sea monsters, and a cursed maze. Wizards love tradition, but at what cost? In their world, risking children's lives in the name of legacy wasn't just accepted, it was expected. Number 9. Who checked the safety of the tasks? The tasks were dangerous, that was the point. Dragons, merpeople, a maze filled with dark magic. But danger is not the same as chaos. These events should have been monitored, double-checked, warded against tampering. And yet Barty Crouch Jr., a known Death Eater, managed to infiltrate the tournament from the inside. Disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, he altered the course of every task. "He's been guiding Harry all year," Dumbledore said after it was too late. But where were the safety checks? Where was the oversight? A fake professor had lived inside Hogwarts for 10 months. He manipulated the Triwizard Cup into a portkey. He fed Harry secret spells. He stunned Fleur. He imperioused Crumb. And no one noticed. Not Dumbledore, not Snape, not the Ministry. The security of the entire event was a thin illusion, shattered by one man and a flask of polyjuice potion. The tasks weren't tested for sabotage. The cup wasn't examined. It felt less like a competition and more like bait, and the adults let it happen. Number 10. Why was Harry allowed without guardian consent? Harry Potter was 14, not 17, not of age, not legally permitted to enter the Triwizard tournament. The rules were clear. No student under 17 could participate. Yet when the goblet chose him, no one even asked for a guardian's signature. Not Dumbledore, not McGonagall, not Madame Pomfrey. No one wrote to the Dursleys, no official parchment, no permission form. And these were not simple school games. This was a deadly competition where champions faced dragons, merpeople, and curses in a maze. The excuse? The Goblet of Fire constitutes a binding magical contract. But who created such a law? And why would it apply to someone who never consented in the first place? Harry didn't enter his name. He was tricked. Even if the magic was ancient and complex, why didn't a single adult challenge the logic? Dumbledore, the very man who shielded Harry since birth, raised his voice in the Great Hall. "Did you put your name in the Goblet of Fire, Harry?" But after that he accepted it. No appeal, no ministry hearing, just blind obedience to a flawed system. Imagine if any other underage student had been chosen, Colin Creevey, Dennis, Neville Longbottom. Would the school have forced them into the arena with a dragon? It's madness to think the binding contract could override common sense and legal responsibility. But the moment the goblet spat out Harry's name, every adult surrendered to its glow, as if law and logic had vanished with the sparks. Number 11. Nobody noticed the goblet's malfunction? When the Goblet of Fire flared a fourth time, the Great Hall fell into stunned silence. "Harry Potter," it whispered. Not Victor Crumb, not Fleur Delacour, not Cedric Diggory, but a fourth name from a fourth school that didn't exist. It was a moment of disbelief. Then came gasps, then whispers. But what should have come next? An investigation never happened. Dumbledore looked concerned, yes, but even he did not halt the tournament. The goblet had spoken, and that was the end of the discussion. No one asked the right questions. Not Professor McGonagall, who had always been quick to suspect foul play. Not Professor Snape, who distrusted everyone, especially Harry. Not even Barty Crouch Sr., a ministry official known for his obsession with rules. "The goblet's decision is binding," they repeated. But how could it be binding if it was clearly tampered with? Everyone accepted the situation as magical law. No one considered the possibility that the goblet had been cursed or manipulated. This wasn't just any enchanted object. The Goblet of Fire was supposed to be one of the most secure, magical artifacts in the wizarding world, protected by age lines, spellwork, and tradition. Yet someone, Barty Crouch Jr., under the guise of Mad-Eye Moody, had tricked it into selecting Harry, not just adding a name but forging an entire non-existent school. That kind of magic isn't subtle, it leaves traces. Yet no one cast a single detection spell on the goblet. No one tested it for interference. No one even considered that it could lie. It's strange, considering the people involved. Dumbledore, who could sense magic in a room. Snape, a master of dark arts. McGonagall, a strict enforcer of rules. And still they treated the goblet's fourth choice as a mystical accident instead of what it truly was, a warning, a red flag, a blinking sign that something was terribly wrong. But no one followed the trail, not until it ended in a graveyard. Number 12, the Ministry's total inaction. Cornelius Fudge arrived at Hogwarts wearing a bowler hat and a frown. Cedric Diggory was dead, a boy, a champion, the pride of Hufflepuff. And how did the Minister for Magic respond? By refusing to believe a word. Harry said, "He's lying," Fudge hissed. "He's confused. He must be." Instead of ordering an investigation into the goblet, the maze, the cup-port key, or the sudden appearance of Death Eaters, the Ministry turned its back. One of their own had just died on school grounds, and they called it an accident. Throughout the tournament, Ministry officials were present. Bartemius Crouch Sr. was one of the judges. Percy Weasley, ambitious and eager, took notes for him. Ludo Bagman was everywhere, making jokes and placing bets. But when Barty Crouch went missing, no alarm was raised. When Harry started having visions, no one asked questions. When Mad-Eye Moody began behaving erratically, they laughed it off. "We're all watching you, Potter," said Fudge coldly, yet it seemed no one was watching anything that mattered. After the third task ended in tragedy, Dumbledore wasted no time. He called the order. He believed Harry. He knew Voldemort was back. Fudge, on the other hand, insisted it was nonsense. "He's not back. He can't be," the minister shouted, pale and trembling. Denial became policy. The auras were not mobilized. Witnesses were discredited. And when Dumbledore tried to warn the public, he was labeled a dangerous old man, spreading panic. The Triwizard tournament exposed more than just the fragility of magical security. It revealed the Ministry's greatest weakness, fear. They feared the truth more than they feared the Dark Lord. Cedric's death should have been the moment they stood united. Instead, it was the moment they turned away. The Ministry didn't just fail to act, it chose not to, and that choice would cost them dearly. Number 13, how could you fake the age line? Fred and George Weasley stood before the shimmering ring of Dumbledore's age line with identical grins and a stolen bottle of aging potion. "Ready, George?" Fred asked, tipping the contents into his mouth. "Ready," came the reply. A moment later, with grey hair and beards sprouting from their chins, the twins were hurled backward by the spell's defences. Everyone laughed. But beneath the comedy, something didn't sit right. If a basic aging potion, something out of advanced potion making, was enough to get them even halfway through the enchantment, then how powerful was the age line really? Dumbledore himself called it a rather clever enchantment of my own invention, Goblet of Fire, Chapter 16, and yet it couldn't distinguish magically altered age from real maturity. If two schoolboys nearly fooled it, what would have stopped, say, Barty Crouch Jr. from using a more advanced potion and slipping his own name in, or Lucius Malfoy, with connections and influence, from planting Draco's name as a prank, or worse? And what about the Goblet of Fire itself? We're told it's bound by a powerful magical contract, one so serious that even Dumbledore doesn't dare defy it. The Goblet of Fire constitutes a binding magical contract, he says. There can be no change of heart now. You have to compete. Goblet of Fire, Chapter 17. But this supposedly ancient and intelligent object couldn't detect that Harry Potter was underage, or that someone else had submitted his name on his behalf. It treated a magically aged parchment as authentic, ignoring the blatant fraud behind it. The entire system relied on the illusion of magical security, but it crumbled at the first real test. Fred and George exposed the cracks for laughs, Barty Crouch Jr. exploited them for murder, and the goblet, this revered artifact, never questioned any of it. Maybe the real magic wasn't in the contract. Maybe it was in how easily everyone believed it worked. Number 14, Hagrid and the Dragons, a safe choice. Of all the moments in the Harry Potter saga that blur the line between charm and recklessness, the decision to entrust Rubeus Hagrid with the handling of 4 highly dangerous dragons for the first task of the Triwizard tournament might be among the most baffling. Hagrid, half-giant and gamekeeper, is beloved by readers and students alike, but his record with magical creatures is spotty at best. One must only look at his prior exploits, raising a baby dragon in a wooden hut, breeding blast-ended scroots, and once attempting to tame a giant spider that later infested the Forbidden Forest, to see that his heart often overrules his judgment. So why, when the lives of 4 underage champions were on the line, did the organizers of the tournament allow him to coordinate the arrival and concealment of dragons? The dragons were not a side attraction. They were central to the first task, an event designed to test the champion's courage, magical prowess, and quick thinking under pressure. The stakes were monumental, and the creatures involved were lethal. The Hungarian horntail alone had a reputation for being among the most aggressive and unpredictable of dragon species, with a history of burning entire herds of cattle for sport. And yet, the Ministry of Magic saw fit to place Hagrid in charge of transporting, hiding, and ultimately unveiling them to the unsuspecting champions. No matter how one spins it, this feels like letting a child babysit a box of explosives because he happens to like fireworks. It's important to remember that Hagrid is not a qualified magi zoologist. He never finished his education at Hogwarts and is technically not even allowed to perform magic unsupervised. His knowledge of magical creatures is entirely self-taught and deeply coloured by emotion. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the reader watches as Hagrid gleefully shows Harry the dragons, unable to contain his excitement. "I've seen bigger," he says, nearly swooning over the sight of them. This is not the behaviour of a responsible handler. It's the behaviour of a man starstruck by danger, blinded by fascination. He's not thinking about safety protocols nor the psychological impact on the students. He's just thrilled to be near dragons. And his enthusiasm is infectious but misplaced. When he leads Harry under the invisibility cloak to witness the dragons in the clearing, he treats it like a grand secret to be shared with a favoured student rather than a perilous breach of confidentiality. The fact that Harry gains an unfair advantage from this is less troubling than the reality it reveals. Hagrid cannot be trusted to separate personal relationships from official responsibilities. He compromised the integrity of the tournament because he wanted to share his joy. His actions, however unintentional, directly influenced the outcome of the first task. Surely someone like Charlie Weasley, a trained dragon handler with years of experience in Romania, would have been a more rational choice. Charlie not only understands dragon behavior, but is also respected by his peers and fully capable of following ministry regulations. Indeed, it is Charlie and his colleagues who actually escort the dragons to the school. But once they arrive, they seemingly hand over operational control to Hagrid, a man who once thought a baby Norwegian ridgeback was appropriate pet material for a school environment. Why wasn't Charlie left in charge throughout the first task's preparation? Why was he relegated to the background? Even Professor McGonagall, a stickler for rules and decorum, appears uneasy with Hagrid's role. Her tension is palpable in the scene following Harry's unexpected exposure to the dragons. When she finds out Harry knows about the creatures in advance, she is stern but stops short of outrage, as if resigned to the fact that anything involving Hagrid is bound to spiral into chaos. It's not approval, it's exasperation. She's seen this happen too many times to be surprised. Bartemius Crouch, a man known for his adherence to rules and procedure, is similarly passive. This is perhaps even more shocking. One would expect Crouch, who once imprisoned his own son for violating the law, to show more concern over dragons being introduced into a school setting under such haphazard oversight. Yet he, too, seems to shrug off the matter. Is it because of bureaucratic fatigue, or was Hagrid's involvement seen as a harmless eccentricity, something not worth the political capital to oppose? One could argue that Dumbledore's trust in Hagrid is at the root of this illogical delegation. Dumbledore, known for valuing loyalty over credentials, has always shielded Hagrid from scrutiny. From reinstating him as gamekeeper after his expulsion to appointing him as the Care of Magical Creatures professor despite his lack of formal training, Dumbledore's fondness for Hagrid has consistently overridden practicality. In Goblet of Fire, this pattern continues. Dumbledore clearly supports Hagrid's involvement in the tournament, even when that involvement includes guarding dragons, a task more fitting for a specialist than a sentimental amateur. But affection is not an argument. The Triwizard tournament is supposed to represent the peak of inter-school magical competition. It is a dangerous event requiring precise coordination and strict adherence to safety measures. The inclusion of dragons, magnificent and deadly, demanded the utmost professionalism. Allowing Hagrid to manage them undercuts the seriousness of the task. It transforms a rigorous magical trial into a glorified pet show. The book gives us glimpses into how close things came to disaster. The dragons are volatile and barely restrained. One of them nearly escapes during the first task. The Hungarian Horntail, Harry's opponent, breaks free of her chains and rampages dangerously close to the stands. It was like watching a wreck happen in slow motion, one observer notes. If the dragon had turned toward the audience instead of the champion, the event could have ended in catastrophe. Is this the level of risk the Ministry was comfortable with, or did they, too, fall under Hagrid's spell? Number 15. No one noticed. Moody wasn't Moody. Of all the peculiarities within the fourth installment of the Harry Potter series, the Goblet of Fire, few are more baffling in hindsight than the successful year-long impersonation of Alastor Mad-Eye Moody by Barty Crouch Jr. Despite being surrounded by some of the most talented and intuitive wizards and witches in the magical world, no one, not Albus Dumbledore, not Minerva McGonagall, not Severus Snape, not even Moody's old comrades, suspected that the grizzled ex-aura might be someone else entirely. The real Moody, locked in a magical trunk for 10 months, went completely unnoticed, while his imposter paraded through Hogwarts, openly violating rules, intimidating students, and acting wildly out of character. Moody, as readers had come to understand, was a legend among auras. Known for his paranoia, he had a reputation for extreme vigilance and a deep mistrust of others. Yet the man who walked the halls of Hogwarts that year did not entirely embody that caution. Barty Crouch Jr., using Polyjuice Potion to maintain the disguise, presented a distorted version of Moody, one who drank constantly from a suspicious flask, taught unforgivable curses to fourth years, and fixated obsessively on Harry Potter. The change in demeanor was significant. As Hermione observed during the first lesson, Professor Moody showed us the imperious curse and put us under it. The idea that Dumbledore would allow such teaching, and that Moody himself would endorse it, should have raised alarms. And yet it did not. Minerva McGonagall, ever perceptive and fiercely protective of her students, notably reacted with horror when learning about Moody's teaching methods. Yet she did not pursue it further. "Your new defense against the dark arts teacher is not to be messed with," she warned, but that was all. This seems astonishing considering her consistent scrutiny of unusual behavior in the past. This is the same professor who, in The Philosopher's Stone, immediately suspected foul play when Harry's broom was jinxed. And yet, when presented with a colleague who visibly tortured a spider in front of children and spoke about unforgivable curses with disturbing enthusiasm, she expressed disapproval and moved on. Severus Snape, meanwhile, had even more reason to be suspicious. Snape disliked Moody deeply, a sentiment made obvious by his sneering references and curt tone whenever the subject arose. But more critically, Snape was a skilled legilimens and a master of subtle observation. Barty Crouch Jr., no matter how skilled in impersonation, would not have had access to Moody's private memories or inner experiences. The chance that Snape, of all people, failed to notice something deeply amiss with his colleague stretches credibility, especially considering that Snape, in earlier books, quickly spotted when Harry had been dabbling in off-limits areas of magic. And yet Snape did not act. He expressed irritation, especially when Moody searched his private stores or challenged his authority, but never voiced suspicions publicly. Even in private, Snape did not bring his doubts to Dumbledore. This is odd, considering his vigilance when it came to anything that might pose a threat to the school. And to Harry, after all, this is the man who, in The Prisoner of Azkaban, was convinced that Sirius Black was actively plotting to harm students, that he would now be silent in the face of a teacher who promoted dangerous magic, is hard to reconcile. There is also the issue of Dumbledore. If anyone was capable of detecting deception at Hogwarts, it was him. He had known the real Moody for decades and had brought him in with the intention of protecting the school and overseeing the Triwizard tournament. For such a careful man, Dumbledore showed remarkable complacency. In one scene, after the second task, he merely raises his eyebrows when Moody gives Harry 10 points for moral fibre, even though this was completely out of step with the reserved and pragmatic Alastair Moody of Aura fame. Moreover, the very idea that a polyjuice potion could be used over such a prolonged period, right under the nose of Hogwarts' headmaster, raises logistical and magical red flags. Polyjuice requires constant replenishment, brewed carefully over a month. Surely someone would have noticed the ingredients disappearing, the smells, or the preparation rituals. Dobby eventually provides Gillyweed to Harry, after Moody hints it to Neville, but why did nobody question why a professor was meddling so specifically in the tournament's outcome? Then there's Hagrid. The half-giant had known Moody from the past and had an intuitive way of sensing authenticity in people. He trusted Dumbledore above all, and yet he too never expressed concern about the defense professor's behavior. But Moody appeared manipulative, goading Hagrid into showing Harry the dragons before the first task. A real Aura might have seen that as an unnecessary risk, not to mention a potential breach of the rules. And yet, the deception passed. Phileas Flitwick and Pomona Sprout, both heads of houses and seasoned educators, also failed to see through the facade. These were not inattentive professors. They dealt with trolls, basilisks, and the reappearance of the heir of Slytherin. But they apparently believed that the aggressive, unpredictable, and rule-bending new teacher was just Moody being Moody. "He's quite mad, you know," Ron says at one point, summing up the general consensus. But this normalization of madness as a cover for wildly unorthodox behavior seems like a glaring oversight. Even among the students, no one voiced concern that the man wasn't who he said he was. Fred and George Weasley, never shy about voicing skepticism or challenging authority, showed admiration for Moody's chaotic style. Hermione, perhaps the sharpest student at Hogwarts, found his lessons troubling, but chalked them up to an unorthodox teaching style. "It's illegal to use the Imperious Curse on students," she exclaimed. But beyond that, she did not pursue her intuition. This is especially ironic given that Hermione had previously uncovered the mystery of the Philosopher's Stone, the Basilisk, and even Lupin's lycanthropy with precision. Number 16, the second task's purposeful vagueness. Of all the tests faced by Harry Potter during the perilous Triwizard tournament, the second task remains one of the strangest from a narrative and logical perspective. It wasn't just the eerie silence of the Black Lake or the haunting song of the Merpeople that made it memorable. It was the deliberate obscurity surrounding its objective. The champions were told they would need to retrieve that which you'll sorely miss from the depths. But no one told them what would be taken, not a name, not a hint, only a riddle sung in cryptic verse. The test wasn't only physical, it played directly on their fears, threatening to rip away someone they loved without warning. And that's where the logic begins to unravel. In a school setting, even a magical one, it seems bizarre, if not cruel, that the organizers would intentionally conceal the true nature of the task. After all, these were students, not soldiers. Cedric Diggory, Fleur Delacour, Victor Crumb, and Harry were teenagers. And while the Triwizard tournament had a reputation for danger, there's a distinct difference between testing courage and causing trauma. The line becomes dangerously thin when the supposed challenge involves what looks like a real kidnapping of a loved one. The riddle, delivered through the mermaid's song, was enigmatic. Come seek us where our voices sound. We cannot sing above the ground. And while you're searching, ponder this. We've taken what you'll sorely miss. It gave no information about who had been taken, not even a suggestion. The champions were expected to prepare for an underwater rescue without knowing who or what they were to retrieve. This lack of clarity didn't just make things harder logistically, it inserted a psychological twist so sharp that it might have undone a less emotionally steady witch or wizard. Harry's confusion was evident. He scoured the library with Hermione, unsure whether he would be rescuing an object, a memory, or a person. As the hour approached, his mind swam with possibilities, none of them comforting. "It's not as if they've kidnapped Sirius, is it?" he fretted. But the fear was real, and it wasn't just him. Each champion had someone they loved stolen in the night and left at the mercy of cold water and mer-people. Yet not one of them knew, until the final moment, who was gone. For Harry, it was Ron. For Cedric, Cho Chang. For Victor, Hermione. For Fleur, her younger sister Gabrielle. The stakes were not just high, they were horrifying. What kind of message does that send? That your closest companions can be taken, used as pawns, and returned only if you perform well enough. Even if, as Dumbledore later claimed, there was no real danger that information was not passed to the champions. They were meant to believe that harm might come. Fleur's reaction when she discovered Gabrielle at the bottom of the lake was genuine panic. She failed to complete the task, not because of lack of ability, but because the fear for her sister overwhelmed her. That's not a test of magical skill, that's psychological warfare. Harry, too, was deeply affected. Upon discovering not just Ron, but Hermione, Cho, and Gabrielle underwater, he refused to leave them behind. Despite being told to retrieve only one, he remained with them until the last possible moment. It is stated in Goblet of Fire, Harry remained rooted to the spot. Ron was here, but so were the others. Cho was there, Hermione, even Gabrielle Delacour. All of them were tied up, asleep or unconscious. He looked between them. Which one should he leave? His choice to stay, to ensure no one was left behind, earned him moral points, but it also shows the immense emotional stress the task imposed. It's difficult to imagine any educational institution, even one like Hogwarts, allowing such a scenario without consent from the students, or at least informed expectations. Did the champions agree to risk their friends' well-being? Did their companions consent to being placed unconscious in a lake? Did Fleur's 10-year-old sister have any say in the matter? The silence surrounding these questions is deafening. Hogwarts' defense might be that the tournament is governed by ancient traditions, but tradition does not absolve responsibility. The silence of the organizers seems deliberate. Crouch Sr., posing as the head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports, oversaw the proceedings. But he was under the imperious curse, his body manipulated by Barty Crouch Jr., masquerading as Mad Eye Moody. In this context, the entire tournament structure becomes suspect. Perhaps the ambiguity of the second task wasn't just tradition, it was a manipulation. One designed not to test, but to break. A subtle way of wearing down the champions, particularly Harry, who was the real target all along, and yet no one questions it within the walls of the castle, the faculty, The judges, even the spectators, accept the task as just another magical obstacle. The crowd cheers when champions emerge with their charges, unaware that for the past hour those teenagers have believed their loved ones might drown. The illusion of safety was preserved only for the audience, not the participants. It's a chilling contrast. Imagine being Cedric, diving into the depths not knowing if Cho would be alive when he reached her, or Victor, unsure if Hermione would wake. The magical sleep imposed on the captives made them appear dead to the eye. There is no greater terror than believing someone you love has been harmed, and you are too late to stop it. For a test of bravery, it borders on psychological cruelty. Even Harry, who had faced Voldemort, Dementors, and dragons, admitted his dread. In Goblet of Fire, it is written, Harry felt as though someone had punched him in the stomach. Ron was gone. Kidnapped. What if this was a trick? What if it wasn't part of the task at all? That uncertainty wasn't just narrative, it was structural. The tournament's very design leaned into fear as a tool. What's more alarming is how this could have gone terribly wrong. What if one of the champions had failed completely? Fleur almost did. What if none returned in time? What if the merpeople had misunderstood their instructions or a spell failed underwater? Magic is not flawless. And despite Dumbledore's insistence that all was monitored, the lake is a vast, ancient place filled with creatures not entirely friendly to humans. And what does it teach? That fear must be endured, that emotional ties can be weaponized. These are not lessons fit for children. If anything, the task teaches distrust, that those in power will withhold truth for the sake of spectacle. It was not the champions who failed logic, it was the tournament itself. Dumbledore's silence is particularly troubling. A champion of fairness and protection, he nonetheless allowed this to unfold. He sat at the judges' table while Harry nearly lost himself in guilt and panic. He may have believed it would all resolve safely, but faith in the outcome does not absolve the risk. Even Albus Dumbledore must answer to the moral weight of what was permitted under his watch. The books often celebrate Harry's moral compass, and this task is no exception. He risked losing points by refusing to abandon the others. He prioritized safety over victory, humanity over competition, and he was rewarded not for magical prowess but for compassion. But that does not make the challenge itself just. The lesson Harry learned was one the organizers had no right to teach. Even more ironic is that the audience never learns of this internal struggle. They only see the triumph, the emergence from the water, the dramatic rescues. The emotional labor, the fear, the ethical choices, those remain hidden. It's spectacle over substance, theater over truth. For Fleur, the failure was devastating. Her sister was used as a pawn and Fleur was unable to act. Gabrielle's inclusion remains one of the most ethically baffling parts of the task. She was not a student, not a volunteer, just a child chosen as bait. That alone should have prompted outrage. In hindsight, the second task was not about skill but submission. Would the champions accept the unknown? Would they obey despite fear? It tested not magical ability but psychological endurance, and in doing so it revealed far more about the adults running the tournament than the students forced to play it. The logic collapses under scrutiny. There were safer ways to test underwater skills, retrieving an enchanted item, solving a riddle beneath pressure, confronting magical creatures. But the choice to endanger or simulate endangerment of a loved one was deliberate. It exploited the strongest bonds a young person can have and threatened to sever them just to see what would happen. The Triwizard tournament is often remembered for its dangers, but the true cruelty lay not in the dragons or the maze. It was in the moments where fear was orchestrated, where silence was weaponized, where love was tested not through bravery but through manipulation, and where, in the stillness of the Black Lake, a child was made to choose between victory and conscience. Number 17. Sharing clues was apparently fine. The Triwizard tournament, cloaked in tradition and danger, was meant to be a test of nerve, intellect, and integrity. It was a spectacle meant to unify magical schools, not divide them. Yet in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, we witness a scene that quietly unravels the logic of the entire event, an inconsistency so glaring it begs for scrutiny. Harry shares critical information about the first task with Cedric Diggory, a fellow champion, and instead of being penalized, he is lauded for his decency. But in a tournament where surprise is sacred and secrecy is law, why was this breach not treated as a violation? From the very moment Harry stumbles upon the knowledge that dragons will be involved in the first task, the stakes shift. It is Rubeus Hagrid, the gamekeeper and professor with a penchant for rule-bending, who guides Harry illegally and without the consent of the judges to witness the Hungarian horntail. They're seriously misunderstood creatures, Hagrid says, with stars in his eyes, but Harry isn't thinking about magical creature welfare. He's thinking survival. In that moment, he becomes the only champion with advanced knowledge of what's to come. Not because he's cunning, but because he was chosen, unwillingly, and the adults around him seek to level the playing field in their own way. But the moment of transgression arrives, not in that hidden valley where the dragons are caged, but later when Harry decides to share the information with Cedric Diggory. This act, presented as noble, alters the foundation of the tournament's rules. The secrecy of each task was emphasized from the beginning. Ludo Bagman and Barty Crouch Sr. both made it clear, no one must know what lies ahead. The entire premise rests upon the raw reactions and strategies of champions facing the unknown. The tasks are not puzzles to be solved ahead of time, but ordeals to be confronted in real time. And yet Harry approaches Cedric near the prefect's bathroom and quietly tells him, "Dragons, that's the first task. They've got one for each of us." Cedric is startled, even skeptical, but Harry insists. He is not compelled by rules or pressured by peers. He simply thinks it's fair. Fair because Cedric was the real Hogwarts champion, and he shouldn't be at a disadvantage because Harry stumbled across a dragon in the woods with Hagrid. Harry acts from a place of guilt, perhaps, or empathy. What he does not act from is adherence to the rules of the tournament. This is where the narrative begins to fray. If secrecy is so paramount, why is there no punishment for its breach? Cedric is now equipped with insider knowledge. He can prepare spells, strategies, and mindset accordingly. It's no longer a test of his ability to adapt to the unknown. It's an open book test. The entire integrity of the task is compromised. Yet the judges say nothing. They do not reprimand Harry. They do not disqualify him or deduct points. In fact, the story implies he did something honourable. In Dumbledore's office later, Sirius Black remarks on the first task, saying, "They're using dragons. That's not just dangerous, that's irresponsible." Sirius, who has lived through 2 wars and seen what recklessness can do, sees the absurdity. But no one comments on the fact that Harry may have broken a tournament rule by sharing what he knew. Instead, the focus remains on the task's brutality. Even more confounding is the comparison to Barty Crouch Jr.'s disguised persona, Mad-Eye Moody. He is the puppet master who manipulates the entire tournament to ensure Harry wins. He gives Harry an unfair advantage by guiding him at every turn, under the guise of teaching. In any other context, this would be seen as blatant cheating, but here it's hidden behind the mask of mentorship. When Moody advises Harry to play to his strengths and subtly nudges him toward using his broom, he's practically scripting Harry's victory. Yet again, the tournament's sacred rule of independent challenge is dismantled, and so we return to Cedric, the quiet hero. When he receives the information about the dragons, he takes it seriously. It changes his fate. He prepares, and because he knows what to expect, he is able to face his dragon with a cool head. Unlike Fleur Delacour, who is overwhelmed, and Victor Crumb, who partially blinds his dragon in desperation, Cedric approaches the task with studied resolve. This is not luck. This is preparation, born of forbidden knowledge. Yet when the scores are tallied, there is no adjustment, no asterisk beside his name. The wizarding world thrives on rules, rituals, and the illusion of order. The Ministry of Magic is obsessed with protocol. The Department of Magical Games and Sports operates under layers of regulation, and yet, in the most high-profile event of the decade, we see a structure built on secrecy crumble under the weight of sentiment. Harry's gesture, while kind, is rule-breaking. And rule-breaking in a deadly tournament is not a quirk, it's a risk to life and fairness. What if the roles had been reversed? Imagine if Krum had learned of the dragons and told no one. Imagine if Fleur had overheard it and kept it to herself. They would have been accused of manipulation, even treachery. But because it is Harry, and because his motive is generosity, the system bends. Morality trumps regulation, but only selectively. The hypocrisy does not end there. After the first task, when Rita Skeeter begins publishing her inflammatory articles, the school staff becomes obsessed with reputation and optics. McGonagall scolds Harry for giving interviews. Dumbledore warns about the fragility of perception. But where was that vigilance when Harry shared a secret that could have upended the competition? The outrage is misdirected. The story suggests that champions are allowed to prepare, to practice, but not to know. And once they know, the illusion is shattered. Hermione Granger, ever the scholar, is furious at the unfairness of the system. She says, "It's not just a game, people have died." But even she, for all her righteousness, never questions why sharing the dragon information wasn't punished. She accepts that Harry acted from goodwill and moves on. The system is never questioned, only its outcomes. When the second task arrives and the champions must retrieve something precious from the Black Lake, the rules again emphasize secrecy. This time, Harry learns the objective only through the golden egg, a puzzle meant to test his wit. But again, outside help guides him. Dobby, the house elf, gives him gillyweed. This, too, is not disqualified. The tournament's ideals are fiction, its execution is riddled with exceptions, and so the fundamental contradiction remains. If secrecy is essential, why is its breach tolerated? If preparation is meant to be personal, why are external advisors, human or otherwise, permitted to influence the outcome? The story never provides an answer. It offers sentiment in place of logic. Harry is good, therefore his decisions are good, even when they're wrong. The problem is not that Harry helped Cedric. The problem is that the rules are enforced unevenly. If the tournament allows for strategic alliances, then let them be official. Let champions share information freely. If not, then enforce the rule with clarity and consistency. Instead, the narrative dances between ideals. Dumbledore, the architect of so many systems, watches it unfold and says nothing. There is a strange irony in the fact that Cedric, armed with Harry's warning, still dies in the end. He is the one champion who did not cheat, manipulate, or seek advantage, yet he benefits from Harry's unauthorized disclosure. And it is Cedric, not Harry, who pays the final price. His death is not a punishment, but it casts a long shadow over the tournament's ethics. What began as a contest of valor ends as a theatre of tragedy. In the final chapters, as Voldemort rises and the Triwizard Cup becomes a portkey, the tournament ceases to matter. The larger story engulfs it. But that does not erase the inconsistencies that came before. They linger like smoke after fire. The Triwizard Tournament promised to reward bravery, cunning, and magical prowess. Instead, it rewarded secrecy when convenient, and broke its own rules when it suited the story's moral. And this is not a condemnation of Harry, it is a reflection of a world that often favors narrative over structure. The boy who lived is also the boy who shared. But in sharing, he exposed more than dragons. He exposed a system that could be bent, not by villains, but by virtue. Would Cedric have died if the tournament had been stricter? Would Harry have survived if he hadn't been coached? These questions linger in the shadows. The answers are lost to time or perhaps buried in the ashes of the Hungarian horntail's breath. But one truth remains. In the Triwizard Tournament, rules were written in ink, but rewritten in feeling. And feeling, no matter how noble, cannot be the backbone of fair competition. Number 18, Real Moody, locked in a trunk for months. The Triwizard Tournament was meant to be a grand celebration, a revival of ancient magical tradition that would unite 3 wizarding schools in friendly rivalry. but beneath the surface of dragonfire and maze walls lay a mystery so glaring that even the brightest minds at Hogwarts seemed to ignore it. Where was the real Alastair Mad-Eye Moody during the entirety of the tournament year? From the very beginning of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, readers are introduced to a version of Moody that feels both true and somehow off. He grumbles about constant vigilance, teaches defense against the dark arts with unorthodox intensity, and carries the scars of a life spent battling dark wizards. Yet this wasn't the real Mad-Eye at all. This was Barty Crouch Jr., one of Voldemort's most fanatical Death Eaters, concealed by Polyjuice Potion and a masterful deception that fooled an entire castle. The question that haunts any close reader is not how he pulled it off, but why no one noticed what he had to do to maintain the act. Moody, the real one, was hidden away in a magical trunk with 7 locks, a trunk that sat in the imposter's office all year long. That same trunk was placed in plain sight within a teaching space accessible to students and faculty alike. Fred and George Weasley visited Moody's office. Dumbledore entered it. Snape lurked around, even Harry had been there, and yet none of them questioned the strange multi-compartment chest that hummed with enchantments and hid a living, breathing man beneath layers of magical wood and lockwork. The very nature of the trunk itself raises alarms. It wasn't an ordinary piece of luggage. As described in the book, it had 7 keyholes in a vertical row down the front, and Moody unlocked each one in turn to reveal different contents. But the last compartment was a deep pit in which the real Moody was trapped. This was not a trunk used to store books or classroom materials. It was a vault, a prison, and it stood not in a hidden dungeon or a forbidden chamber, but in the very office of a Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. Alastair Moody was not a man easily forgotten or ignored. He was a well-known figure in the wizarding world, a retired auror with decades of service, notorious for his paranoia and battle-hardened demeanor. Dumbledore had known him personally for years. They had fought together against Grindelwald's remnants and the early Death Eaters, yet even Albus Dumbledore, famed for his insight and vigilance, never questioned why his old friend had become more erratic, more intense, more fanatical. Crouch Jr.'s impersonation was aided by Moody's already strange behavior. As a man known for obsession with security, perhaps the trunk didn't seem too out of character. But still, 7 locks? A compartment so deep it could imprison a full-grown man? Even for someone like Moody, this should have raised eyebrows. At the very least, magical items of such power are usually subject to regulation by the Ministry. Hogwarts was not a fortress of ignorance. It was filled with sharp minds and sensitive magical instruments, and still no one detected the illusion. What is even more baffling is the lack of magical interference. The wizarding world is teeming with spells designed to detect life, deceit, or magical concealment. The spell Hominum Revelio can sense the presence of hidden people. Prior Incantato can reveal a wand's recent history. Moody's office had a faux glass and sneakoscopes, all of which are designed to detect danger, but none of them responded to the actual threat sitting in the trunk, mere feet away from the imposter. And yet the real Mad-Eye was very much alive. He was described as pale and weakened, but conscious enough to comprehend the situation. How could Dumbledore, or even someone as inquisitive as Hermione Granger, miss the reality that a man had been trapped for months in magical captivity? The office was not warded like a prison. It was open to visitors. The assumption seems to be that no one ever looked closely enough. Or perhaps worse, no one dared question the new professor. One must also question the ethical silence of the magical objects themselves. The faux glass in Moody's office, for instance, is said to show the faces of enemies drawing nearer. In the final confrontation, it shows Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Snape, but during the school year, it never reacted to Barty Crouch Jr. presence. If Moody's magical eye could see through the back of his own head and through solid objects, why couldn't it detect a falsehood from his own body? Furthermore, the Marauder's map presents another massive flaw in the logic of this deception. This enchanted parchment, capable of showing every person within Hogwarts by name, would have revealed 2 Moodys, one in the classroom and one confined in a trunk. Fred and George had access to this map. Harry used it frequently. Why did no one ever see two identical names in two separate locations? Or was it assumed that Mad-Eye was simply pacing around or casting illusions? It stretches credulity to imagine that this map, so pivotal in previous books, failed to uncover the most critical deception of the fourth. The very nature of the Polyjuice potion demands constant attention. It must be consumed hourly to maintain the transformation. That means Crouch Jr. had to brew the potion regularly, likely storing it somewhere in his office. And yet no one smelled the familiar stench. No one noticed the absence of standard magical instruction. He was too focused on manipulating Harry's path to the Triwizard Cup. He rarely taught from the textbook, instead indulging in unforgivable curses on spiders. Was this not alarming? Why didn't the other teachers question the absence of curriculum? Another strange detail is Dumbledore's behavior. Known for his deep perception and ability to see beyond surface illusions, he placed enormous trust in Moody. He entrusted him with the safety of Harry Potter during a year filled with death traps, but Dumbledore never asked why his friend had changed so drastically in speech and demeanor. Moody was harsher, more chaotic, and far more emotionally unstable. Dumbledore, who once saw through Quirrell's nerves and Lockhart's vanity, never even suspected. Then there is the issue of proximity. The trunk wasn't buried in the Forbidden Forest or hidden behind enchantments. It was right there in the corner of the room. It's impossible to imagine that during one of the many occasions where Dumbledore conversed with Moody, he didn't sense something unusual. Magical aura, human energy, or even the subconscious recognition that the person before him felt wrong. None of these triggered even the slightest concern. During the Yule Ball, Moody is seen skulking around, watching everyone closely. He behaves like a predator in a forest of unsuspecting prey. His actions are tolerated because people believe this is just Mad-Eye being Mad-Eye. But the real Moody, despite his grim methods, was never cruel. He was severe, but just. Crouch Jr., however, is manipulative and unhinged. The difference, though subtle, would have been visible to anyone who truly knew the real man. The fact that no one did exposes a flaw not just in logic, but in emotional realism. In hindsight, the ruse was only revealed because Crouch Jr. slipped. He took Harry too far. When Harry returned with Cedric's corpse and Voldemort's rebirth became known, the real story began to crack. Dumbledore moved fast. "He's not Moody," he said almost immediately. "He's Barty Crouch Jr." But why only then? Why not before, when the clues had been scattered like breadcrumbs across the entire year? The trunk, once opened, revealed the grotesque truth. "He's in here," Dumbledore said, referring to the real Moody. Unconscious but alive. The man had been deprived of light, food, and freedom for months. A celebrated aura reduced to a prisoner in his own office. It is a detail that shatters the credibility of every magical safeguard Hogwarts supposedly had in place. If a Death Eater could pull this off, what else could have happened under their noses? The question of why no one sensed the truth can only be answered with one word: assumption. Everyone assumed Mad-Eye was simply being himself. No one questioned the locks, the madness, the sudden interest in Harry's success. No one asked where Moody spent his free time or why his conversations lacked depth. The same school that once doubted Lupin's health and Snape's loyalties suddenly lost all sense of inquiry. There is a painful irony in the idea that a spell as simple as Alohomora could have undone the entire plot. If any student or teacher had dared to test the locks on that enchanted trunk, the truth would have emerged instantly. The most dangerous deception of the tournament was protected not by dark magic, but by social blindness. The real Moody's freedom was held hostage by nothing more complex than complacency. And perhaps that's the real lesson buried beneath the Triwizard glamour. In a world so saturated with enchantments and illusions, sometimes it is the most obvious question that is never asked. Where is the real Moody? Why is there a trunk that smells of fear? Why do we trust what we see when we know it can so easily lie? The Triwizard tournament was never safe. Dragons and mermaids, mazes and curses, these were spectacles. The true danger lay in the silence that wrapped around a wooden chest in a dark corner of a professor's office. A silence so complete that even the greatest wizard of the age failed to hear the man crying from within. Number 19. Why was the goblet a portkey? Of all the twisted puzzles in the 4th year at Hogwarts, few are more jarring than the final revelation of the Triwizard Cup. In a competition meant to test skill, courage, and magical mastery, the very prize that embodied victory became a weapon of betrayal. The Triwizard Cup, gleaming and proud at the centre of the maze, did not merely signal triumph. It was a portkey, a transportation device that sent Harry Potter and Cedric Diggory not to cheers and celebration, but to death and darkness. It was the heart of a trap, placed in plain sight, and somehow none of the adults noticed. That is the absurdity we must face. The Triwizard Tournament had returned after a century-long hiatus, its dangerous nature previously leading to multiple student deaths. Knowing this, the Ministry, Hogwarts, Beauxbaton and Durmstrang all promised higher safety standards. Every detail, and from the age line guarding the goblet of fire to the enchanted creatures within the maze, was planned with utmost care. Yet the final and most sacred object of the event, the trophy itself, sat unguarded, unchecked, and eventually became a cursed object. How? We are told the cup was turned into a portkey by Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad-Eye Moody. It was meant to send Harry directly to Voldemort, but the implications of this deception are staggering. The cup was placed at the centre of the maze, not just as a finish line, but a physical object that every judge, every organiser, and every official would have acknowledged as central to the tournament. Why was there no verification of magical enchantments on it? Why was the one object designed to be touched? The entire goal of the maze not inspected thoroughly by Dumbledore himself. Crouch Jr. was clever, yes. He manipulated events from inside Hogwarts, subtly pushing Harry forward in each task. But to enchant the Triwizard Cup, an object of such symbolic and functional importance, should have raised alarm bells. This wasn't a random cauldron or a forgotten broomstick in a corridor. It was the trophy, the endpoint, the one magical item guaranteed to come into contact with the winner. And yet no one detected the portkey enchantment? The absurdity only deepens when you remember the efforts made earlier in the year to secure the goblet of fire. Dumbledore drew an age line. Fred and George Weasley were violently rejected when they tried to trick it. The goblet was kept in a guarded room. As Dumbledore said, only those who are 17 and older will be allowed to submit their names. The concern for protection was meticulous until the final task. Then, as if the wariness evaporated, the trophy was left as a magical black box. We know from the books that portkeys are tightly regulated by the Ministry. In Order of the Phoenix, a group of wizards travels using one, and even then the transportation had to be cleared. As Mr. Weasley explains, it's all arranged with the portkey office, yet here, in a prestigious international competition, a portkey is smuggled into the maze and weaponized, with no oversight, no signature, no detection. Are we to believe Barty Crouch Jr. fooled not only Dumbledore but the entire Department of Magical Games and Sports? There's no indication that the cup was shielded with anti-tampering spells. One would expect Dumbledore or Bagman or even Karkaroff to have placed protective charms on it to ensure that no outside enchantments could affect it. Such charms are routine even for common objects, but in this case, a highly sensitive magical artifact in an environment crawling with dangerous creatures and curses was left magically naked. That's not just illogical, it's negligent. What's more, we're expected to believe that the enchantment went entirely unnoticed by any of the seasoned magical experts. Let us not forget that the maze was designed and placed on Hogwarts grounds. Teachers, ministry officials, foreign delegates, they all had time to study and assess the setup. Moody Crouch was cunning, but he wasn't omnipotent. He had limited access and worked alone. It is unrealistic that he could tamper with the cup without anyone sensing the portkey magic. The mechanics of a portkey also raise questions. From Goblet of Fire, we know that portkeys are designed to activate under specific conditions, at a designated time or upon contact. The cup was triggered when touched. That means the enchantment was on the entire time it sat in the maze. That should have been detectable to anyone skilled in magical detection. Even Harry, a fourth-year student, learned to sense magical auras in objects later in the series. Are we to believe that not one adult witch or wizard examined the cup for enchantments before placing it before hundreds of students? Even more frustratingly, the maze was being observed. A commentary box had been set up. Judges monitored progress. Spells and devices were in place to track champions. This was not a hidden backroom. It was a public spectacle. Cedric and Harry were seen approaching the cup. Why didn't the moment they touched it raise any immediate alarms? Did no one notice they had vanished in a flash of portkey magic? After the tragic return, Cedric dead, Harry in shock, and the cup beside them, the entire premise collapsed. Fudge refused to believe Voldemort had returned. But what of the cup itself? If it was found to be a portkey, that alone proved tampering. That alone should have launched a full investigation. Who touched the cup? Who enchanted it? Why were there no magical fingerprints, no traceable residue, no tracking of who cast the spell? It's worth noting that Barty Crouch Jr. was eventually exposed. He admitted under veritaserum that he had enchanted the cup. But here lies another contradiction. How did he manage to do so? The maze wasn't accessible to students or faculty unsupervised. As the final challenge, its construction was treated as a massive operation. Moody's access was limited to his role. Are we to believe he snuck in at night, placed a powerful portkey spell, and left without any detection? By the wards of Hogwarts, by Filch, by Dumbledore's surveillance, or the very magic that supposedly protected students? A deeper issue emerges: symbolic trust. The cup was a representation of honor and achievement. It stood for excellence and triumph. To have it corrupted, to become a vessel of murder, was a symbolic blow to everything Hogwarts claimed to represent. The fact that this betrayal occurred within the walls of the school, under the noses of its protectors, is not only disturbing but logically inconsistent with the level of magical scrutiny we've seen elsewhere in the series. It wasn't as though Harry was meant to stumble across the cup. It was intentionally positioned as the goal. It had to be touched. Crouch Jr. didn't know who would win, but ensured that whoever did would be whisked away. That means the risk of discovery was enormous. Any premature inspection of the cup, any random curse check by a passing aura or magical artifact specialist would have exposed the entire plan. Why was there no such inspection? Consider how many objects in the series are dangerous simply because of unknown enchantments. Riddle's diary, the cursed necklace in Half-Blood Prince, the vanishing cabinet. In each of those cases, the Ministry or Hogwarts showed heightened awareness. After Katie Bell was cursed, the entire school was searched, but in Goblet of Fire, the very object meant to be touched by a student was enchanted by a Death Eater, and nothing was done to verify its safety. This leads to a sobering realization. Either the organizers were dangerously incompetent, which seems out of character for Dumbledore, or the narrative bypassed logic for the sake of drama. In storytelling, suspense is vital, but when suspense demands a collapse of internal logic, the reader is left confused. The Portkey Cup is exactly that kind of moment. It thrills in the moment but collapses under scrutiny. We must also recall that Dumbledore was already suspicious of Crouch Jr., though he hadn't yet identified him. He knew something was wrong. He saw signs, like the strange behavior of Moody and the oddities in the tasks. Yet, with all his insight, he failed to check the one item that mattered most, the very endpoint of the tournament. A master of enchantments, but the one who discovered the 12 uses of dragon's blood, didn't scan the cup for dangerous spells. And what about the judges? Madame Maxime and Karkaroff, heads of rival schools, had every incentive to ensure fairness and safety for their students. Were they also blind to the possibility that the trophy might be used to harm their champions? Especially with Karkaroff's growing fear of Voldemort's return, it's baffling that he would not take greater precautions. The final tragedy, of course, was Cedric's death. A boy full of promise, killed not by a dragon, not by a magical creature or spell within the maze, but by the failure of adults to secure a single object. The cup that was meant to reward glory became a conduit for grief. And that grief was born of negligence, of oversight, of blind trust in the illusion of control. In the end, the Triwizard Cup stands not just as a plot device, but as a flawed symbol. One that was never protected, never questioned, and ultimately used to betray everything it was meant to celebrate. Its transformation into a portkey wasn't just a shocking twist, it was a gaping hole in the logic of magical responsibility. And in a world where magic is power, that kind of carelessness costs lives. Number 20, how did Harry and Cedric arrive at the same time? Of all the twisted puzzles in the fourth year at Hogwarts, few are more jarring than the final revelation of the Triwizard Cup. In a competition meant to test skill, courage, and magical mastery, the very prize that embodied victory became a weapon of betrayal. The Triwizard Cup, gleaming and proud at the center of the maze, did not merely signal triumph. It was a portkey, a transportation device that sent Harry Potter and Cedric Diggory not to cheers and celebration, but to death and darkness. It was the heart of a trap placed in plain sight, and somehow none of the adults noticed. That is the absurdity we must face. The Triwizard Tournament had returned after a century-long hiatus, its dangerous nature previously leading to multiple student deaths. Knowing this, the Ministry, Hogwarts, Beauxbaton, and Durmstrang all promised higher safety standards. Every detail, from the age line guarding the Goblet of Fire to the enchanted creatures within the maze, was planned with utmost care. Yet the final and most sacred object of the event, the trophy itself, sat unguarded, unchecked, and eventually became a cursed object. How? We are told the cup was turned into a portkey by Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad-Eye Moody. It was meant to send Harry directly to Voldemort, but the implications of this deception are staggering. The cup was placed at the center of the maze, not just as a finish line, but a physical object that every judge, every organizer, and every official would have acknowledged as central to the tournament. Why was there no verification of magical enchantments on it? Why was the one object designed to be touched, the entire goal of the maze, not inspected thoroughly by Dumbledore himself? Crouch Jr. was clever, yes. He manipulated events from inside Hogwarts, subtly pushing Harry forward in each task. But to enchant the Triwizard Cup, an object of such symbolic and functional importance, should have raised alarm bells. This wasn't a random cauldron or a forgotten broomstick in a corridor. It was the trophy, the endpoint, the one magical item guaranteed to come into contact with the winner. And yet no one detected the portkey enchantment. The absurdity only deepens when you remember the efforts made earlier in the year to secure the Goblet of Fire. Dumbledore drew an age line. Fred and George Weasley were violently rejected when they tried to trick it. The goblet was kept in a guarded room. As Dumbledore said, only those who are 17 and older will be allowed to submit their names. The concern for protection was meticulous, until the final task. Then, as if the wariness evaporated, the trophy was left as a magical black box. We know from the books that portkeys are tightly regulated by the Ministry. In Order of the Phoenix, a group of wizards travels using one, and even then the transportation had to be cleared. As Mr. Weasley explains, it's all arranged with the portkey office. Yet here, in a prestigious international competition, a portkey is smuggled into the maze and weaponized, with no oversight, no signature, no detection. Are we to believe Barty Crouch Jr. fooled not only Dumbledore but the entire Department of Magical Games and Sports? There's no indication that the cup was shielded with anti-tampering spells. One would expect Dumbledore or Bagman or even Karkaroff to have placed protective charms on it to ensure that no outside enchantments could affect it. Such charms are routine, even for common objects. But in this case, a highly sensitive, magical artifact in an environment crawling with dangerous creatures and curses was left magically naked. That's not just illogical, it's negligent. What's more, we're expected to believe that the enchantment went entirely unnoticed by any of the seasoned magical experts. Let us not forget that the maze was designed and placed on Hogwarts grounds. Teachers, ministry officials, foreign delegates, they all had time to study and assess the setup. Moody Crouch was cunning, but he wasn't omnipotent. He had limited access and worked alone. It is unrealistic that he could tamper with the cup without anyone sensing the portkey magic. The mechanics of a portkey also raise questions. From Goblet of Fire, we know that portkeys are designed to activate under specific conditions, at designated time, or upon contact. The cup was triggered when touched. That means the enchantment was on the entire time it sat in the maze. That should have been detectable to anyone skilled in magical detection. Even Harry, a fourth-year student, learned to sense magical auras in objects later in the series. Are we to believe that not one adult witch or wizard examined the cup for enchantments before placing it before hundreds of students? Even more frustratingly, the maze was being observed. A commentary box had been set up. Judges monitored progress. Spells and devices were in place to track champions. This was not a hidden back room. It was a public spectacle. Cedric and Harry were seen approaching the cup. Why didn't the moment they touched it raise any immediate alarms? Did no one notice they had vanished in a flash of portkey magic? After the tragic return, Cedric dead, Harry in shock, and the cup beside them, the entire premise collapsed. Fudge refused to believe Voldemort had returned. But what of the cup itself? If it was found to be a portkey, that alone proved tampering. That alone should have launched a full investigation. Who touched the cup? Who enchanted it? Why were there no magical fingerprints, no traceable residue, no tracking of who cast the spell? It's worth noting that Barty Crouch Jr. was eventually exposed. He admitted under Veritaserum that he had enchanted the cup. But here lies another contradiction. How did he manage to do so? The maze wasn't accessible to students or faculty unsupervised. As the final challenge, its construction was treated as a massive operation. Moody's access was limited to his role. Are we to believe he snuck in at night, placed a powerful portkey spell, and left without any detection? By the wards of Hogwarts, by Filch, by Dumbledore's surveillance, or the very magic that supposedly protected students? A deeper issue emerges: symbolic trust. The cup was a representation of honor and achievement. It stood for excellence and triumph. To have it corrupted and to become a vessel of murder was a symbolic blow to everything Hogwarts claimed to represent. The fact that this betrayal occurred within the walls of the school, under the noses of its protectors, is not only disturbing, but logically inconsistent with the level of magical scrutiny we've seen elsewhere in the series. It wasn't as though Harry was meant to stumble across the cup. It was intentionally positioned as the goal. It had to be touched. Crouch Jr. didn't know who would win, but ensured that whoever did would be whisked away. That means the risk of discovery was enormous. Any premature inspection of the cup, any random curse check by a passing aura or magical artifact specialist would have exposed the entire plan. Why was there no such inspection? Consider how many objects in the series are dangerous simply because of unknown enchantments. Riddle's diary, the cursed necklace in Half-Blood Prince, the vanishing cabinet. In each of those cases, the Ministry or Hogwarts showed heightened awareness. After Katie Bell was cursed, the entire school was searched. But in Goblet of Fire, the very object meant to be touched by a student was enchanted by a Death Eater, and nothing was done to verify its safety. This leads to a sobering realization. Either the organizers were dangerously incompetent, which seems out of character for Dumbledore, or the narrative bypassed logic for the sake of drama. In storytelling, suspense is vital, but when suspense demands a collapse of internal logic, the reader is left confused. The Portkey Cup is exactly that kind of moment. It thrills in the moment, but collapses under scrutiny. We must also recall that Dumbledore was already suspicious of Crouch Jr., though he hadn't yet identified him. He knew something was wrong. He saw signs, like the strange behavior of Moody and the oddities in the tasks. Yet, with all his insight, he failed to check the one item that mattered most. The very endpoint of the tournament, a master of enchantments, the one who discovered the 12 uses of dragon's blood, didn't scan the cup for dangerous spells. And what about the judges? Madame Maxime and Karkaroff, heads of rival schools, had every incentive to ensure fairness and safety for their students. Were they also blind to the possibility that the trophy might be used to harm their champions? Especially with Karkaroff's growing fear of Voldemort's return, it's baffling that he would not take greater precautions. The final tragedy, of course, was Cedric's death, a boy full of promise, killed not by a dragon, not by a magical creature or spell within the maze, but by the failure of adults to secure a single object. The cup that was meant to reward glory became a conduit for grief, and that grief was born of negligence, of oversight, of blind trust in the illusion of control. In the end, the Triwizard Cup stands not just as a plot device, but as a flawed symbol, one that was never protected, never questioned, and ultimately used to betray everything it was meant to celebrate. Its transformation into a portkey wasn't just a shocking twist, it was a gaping hole in the logic of magical responsibility. And in a world where magic is power, that kind of carelessness costs lives. Number 21, a dead student returns. And that's it? The night air was thick with enchantment, but the crowd didn't cheer. They froze. A golden thread of portkey magic shimmered in the center of the arena, and in a sudden flash, two figures slammed against the grass, one alive, barely standing, and one unmistakably dead. The body of Cedric Diggory, lifeless and cold, lay sprawled at Harry Potter's side, and for a moment the entire stadium seemed to forget it could breathe. It was a moment built for horror. Harry was bleeding, disoriented, his voice cracking as he screamed into the chaos. "He's back! Voldemort's back!" But his cries shattered like glass against a wall of silence. No shield charms leapt to life, no ministry official dashed forward. Dumbledore, though visibly shaken, did not conjure an aura barrier or demand the arena be locked down. Everyone simply stared, as if it were a sad twist in a dramatic performance rather than a trauma unraveling in real time. There was no protocol, no attempt to quarantine Harry for protective spells or check his wand for traces of unforgivable curses. No magical forensic squad swept the area to examine Cedric's body. A student had just died, not in a classroom accident or hallway duel, but during an international tournament hosted under the eyes of multiple ministries. Yet no magical equivalent of a Muggle crime scene investigator arrived. The moment was marked not by shock or outrage, but by a stunned inertia that defied the wizarding world's capacity for reaction. And this was Hogwarts, a school protected by centuries of spells, led by Albus Dumbledore himself, a man who'd once duelled Gellert Grindelwald and emerged victorious. He had every reason to spring into action the moment Harry reappeared. The Triwizard Cup had just been turned into a portkey, a violation of the tournament's deepest magical safeguards. Yet no spell was cast to interrogate the cup. No enchantment detection squad arrived to unweave its recent magical imprints. Why? The cup was a portkey, Harry told Dumbledore, gasping in pain. And Voldemort, he's back. Cedric, he wanted me to bring him back. This is canon. Direct from Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. And yet, instead of freezing the area or placing the cup under a protective dome for forensic analysis, the artifact was left unattended, a magical smoking gun, potentially still dangerous, and unquestionably the scene of a crime. Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, was still at large within the castle grounds. Only Dumbledore's intuition prevented Harry from being whisked away alone with the imposter. And yet even this discovery failed to trigger a lockdown. The very structure of the tournament had been hijacked, from the goblet's selection of Harry's name to the final, fatal return. But no one seemed compelled to question how deep the sabotage ran. No audit was ordered, no independent magical tribunal convened. The deeper you examine this moment, the more it feels like a surreal painting with missing brushstrokes. Cornelius Fudge, Minister of Magic, arrives not with grief or gravity, but with bureaucratic panic. He doesn't ask for spell residue, for magical echoes, or even for the truth. He wants silence. "He's not back," Fudge insists, practically trembling. "He's not back, you're mad." He says this even as Cedric's body lies cooling on the ground. a body that should have triggered every emergency protocol in magical governance. Why was Cedric's death treated as an unfortunate accident and not as evidence of dark magic? Wizards can analyze spells after they've been cast. They can extract memories. They can question objects, even sentient ones. The Triwizard Cup, infused with multiple enchantments, could have been magically examined to reveal its last intended destination. A simple priori incantato on Harry's wand would have shown Voldemort's return in a spectral echo. But no one asks, no one checks. They simply look at Harry, wounded and haunted, and then turn away. Where were the unspeakables from the Department of Mysteries, who might have assessed the deeper magical implications of Voldemort's return? Where were the curse-breakers, the magical historians, the dual investigators? Why was Hogwarts not sealed, examined, and flooded with magical diagnostics? It's as if the wizarding world willfully decided not to know, or worse, that the Ministry deliberately avoided deploying its full magical resources because the truth was too dangerous. Even more disturbing is the response of the international community. The Triwizard Tournament was a multinational affair. Officials from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang were present. 2 of their champions had been in danger. 1 student had died, and yet no magical diplomats demanded answers. No one protested the breach of security. No foreign envoy insisted on inspecting the artifact that had become an instrument of murder. Fleur Delacour wept. Victor Krum stood silent. But no magical embassy demanded reparation or truth, and this was not a world without precedent. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement had acted swiftly in the past, sending Dementors to Little Whinging without a trial, for instance, or deploying entire squads of Aurors to guard a prophecy. But here, with a murdered boy and a traumatized witness, the machinery of magical justice ground to a halt. There was no tribunal, no autopsy, no magical reconstruction of events, just silence. Even the teachers at Hogwarts, veterans like Professor McGonagall, Flitwick, and Snape, offered no outcry. No immediate defensive charms were raised, no protective dome around the cup, no attempt to secure the stadium, which had just been used as a murder site and staging ground for Voldemort's rise. For a school that once hid a Philosopher's Stone behind 7 layers of magical traps, its response to Cedric Diggory's death was hauntingly vacant. If there was ever a time to use Veritaserum, it was now. Harry might have been questioned under careful, humane conditions, not to accuse but to protect, not to traumatize but to understand. His testimony could have helped locate Peter Pettigrew, could have explained the ritual used to restore Voldemort's body, could have confirmed the presence of Death Eaters. But none of that happened. No record was taken, no pensive memories were requested, not even a basic statement was gathered under oath. And yet, Harry had proof. "Wormtail killed Cedric," he said. "Voldemort's back." His body was covered in wounds as the result of the Cruciatus curse. His arm bore a fresh cut from the blood ritual. He had battled an acromantula, dodged deadly hedges, and survived a rebirth of evil. But instead of being believed, he was treated like an inconvenience. The system recoiled from him as if his truth was a contagion. The final insult came when the Ministry began to suppress the truth. Daily Prophet headlines avoided the word murder. Cedric was remembered, yes, but vaguely as a fallen competitor. There was no magical inquest, no tribute from the Ministry, no investigation into how the cup had been enchanted. Even Rita Skeeter, usually gleeful in her sensationalism, found no audience for her usual poison. The system didn't want noise, it wanted forgetfulness, and so the students returned to class. The champions limped back to their schools. The great tournament, once a symbol of magical unity, ended not with celebration but with silence and shame. A moment that should have reshaped the wizarding world was instead buried in denial, and Cedric's name became a whisper, not a warning. But the reader must ask why. Why did a magical society with so many tools for uncovering truth choose not to use a single one of them? Why was the cup not examined? Why was the stadium not secured? Why was Harry not protected or even believed? Why did no one think to say, what if he's right? Instead, the dominant question became, what will it cost us to listen? Harry's return with Cedric's body should have been a turning point. Instead, it became a missed opportunity, one that allowed Voldemort to rise in secret, gathering power while the Ministry squabbled over optics. The Triwizard tournament, meant to build bridges, exposed the cracks instead. And Cedric, brave and loyal, was forgotten by the very world that failed to ask how he died. In a world where portraits speak, goblets choose champions, and wands reveal histories, the greatest crime was not dark magic, it was apathy. The crowd saw a boy return with a corpse and did nothing, not because they couldn't, but because they wouldn't. And that silence, more than any spell, let evil rise again. Number 22, Voldemort's return. All the red flags were there. In the 4th year of Harry Potter's journey through the wizarding world, the Triwizard tournament was revived in a spectacle of ancient magic and international cooperation. But beneath the pageantry there brewed a storm of contradictions and illogical silence that only hindsight would expose. The signs were not only present, they were overwhelming, screaming for attention in every twisted detail, and yet, as Voldemort's return crept ever closer, those best equipped to stop him failed not for lack of ability, but because they refused to believe what stood plainly before them. From the very beginning, something was wrong. The moment Harry Potter's name erupted from the Goblet of Fire, a magical artifact meant to ensure fairness and consent, the atmosphere in the Great Hall shifted. Every wizard present knew the ancient cup was foolproof, bound by magic far older than most charms taught even at Hogwarts. And yet here was a fourth name, from a boy too young to participate, who hadn't entered himself. "Did you put your name into the Goblet of Fire, Harry?" Dumbledore asked in the book, calmly. But there should have been no need for such questions. The cup had been bewitched, and the only kind of wizard capable of such subterfuge would have to be one well-versed in dark, powerful enchantments. That wasn't a prank, that was sabotage. The deception was expertly orchestrated by Barty Crouch Jr., masquerading as Alastor Mad-Eye Moody, one of the most paranoid, experienced auras of the age. That very fact should have raised alarm. No one, not Dumbledore, not McGonagall, not Snape, noticed the oddity that this famously suspicious man now trusted students unusually quickly, handed Harry private lessons, and introduced spells far too dangerous for normal curriculum. He even performed the unforgivable curses in front of children. "You need to know what you're up against," he said. But the real Moody would have considered that madness. The oddness wasn't subtle, it was jarring, and the teachers who had known him for decades turned blind eyes. That silence wasn't wisdom, it was collective delusion. Then came the disappearance of Barty Crouch Sr., one of the highest-ranking ministry officials, who was last seen wandering the Forbidden Forest muttering incoherently. He vanished after trying to reach Dumbledore. A man of his stature, knowledge and discipline does not simply lose his mind overnight. This wasn't a vague disappearance, it was a red flare in the sky. But again, the ministry shrugged. Cornelius Fudge, obsessed with optics and denying instability, refused to investigate deeper. "These are troubled times," he admitted to Dumbledore, yet he did nothing. He dismissed the warnings, accused Harry of hysteria, and covered the truth with political varnish. A child was raising alarms, and the government answered with condescension. Even the very nature of the Triwizard tournament tasks should have prompted concern. They were supposedly designed to test bravery, intelligence, and magical skill, but they became increasingly lethal, twisted beyond tradition. Dragons were released among children, a lake full of Grindylows and merpeople held hostages with only vague clues for survival. The final task, a hedge maze transformed into a dark arena of psychological torment. The champions didn't emerge as victors, they barely escaped with their lives. When Cedric Diggory died, no one could pretend anymore, and yet most did. "He was a good boy," Fudge said, "always liked him." And that was that. The boy was buried, and the truth buried deeper. There's a chilling irony that the very structure built to foster inter-school unity became the stage for Voldemort's resurrection. The Goblet of Fire was corrupted by Barty Crouch Jr. to ensure Harry reached the final task and touched the Triwizard Cup, a portkey designed to deliver him straight into Voldemort's clutches. The layers of magical manipulation required to do this were extensive. This wasn't improvised. It took months. Yet no professor, no ministry official, not even the legendary Dumbledore saw the pattern in time. The tournament, the disappearances, the strange teaching methods, the escalating danger. It wasn't random chaos. It was a campaign. What makes this all the more bewildering is that many of these adults had lived through Voldemort's first rise. They knew his methods, how he used fear, how he recruited, how he crept through institutions masked by followers and traitors. They knew Barty Crouch Jr. had been a Death Eater, supposedly dead or lost in Azkaban. They knew Bertha Jorkins, a ministry employee, had vanished in Albania, last known location of Voldemort himself. And yet no dots were connected. There was no effort to trace the magical anomalies, the bizarre events stacking atop each other like ominous dominoes. The most experienced minds in the wizarding world chose to see shadows instead of enemies. Dumbledore, for all his brilliance, must bear some of the blame. His wisdom was deep, but his trust in certain systems was his flaw. He allowed the tournament to proceed after Harry's forced entry, believing perhaps that it was best to protect the boy by proximity. But what protection was given? Harry was isolated, taunted by his peers, and left to face dragons and mermaids alone. Dumbledore's passive stance allowed evil to fester behind locked doors and enchanted hedges. His intuition surely told him something was amiss, yet he acted too late. "Dark and difficult times lie ahead," he told Harry after the graveyard, but the darkness had already arrived, inside Hogwarts itself. Snape too had a role to play. As a former Death Eater turned double agent, he was uniquely placed to detect shifts in the magical current, especially signs of Voldemort's awakening. Yet there is no record of him expressing suspicion about the strange behavior of Moody or the dark magic seeping into Hogwarts walls. He provided no insight about Crouch's escape, nor did he warn Dumbledore of any changes in the air. His loyalty was firm, but his silence was costly. He knew what dark wizards could do, and still he said nothing until it was far too late. Sirius Black, despite being hunted and haunted, was one of the few who dared to believe Harry's instincts. When Harry described the pain in his scar and the strange dreams he was having, Sirius didn't dismiss them, he feared them. His warnings were ignored by the Ministry and underplayed even by Dumbledore. Harry was not believed because he was young, and that dismissal was systemic. Adults in power clung to order, not truth. But Sirius knew that Voldemort would return through manipulation, not force. He had seen the pattern before. He begged others to see it too. Cornelius Fudge represents the tragic flaw of the Ministry. He was more interested in maintaining calm than pursuing justice. When Harry and Dumbledore revealed the truth about Voldemort's return, Fudge denied it publicly, setting in motion a smear campaign that painted Harry as delusional and Dumbledore as a political threat. This deliberate suppression of truth allowed Voldemort nearly a full year to grow in secret. "You are blinded by the love of the office you hold," Dumbledore accused him, and it was true. Fudge feared fear itself, and that fear became Voldemort's greatest ally. Another piece in this bizarre puzzle is Rita Skeeter. The journalist who dug into half-truths and scandal missed the real story. She wrote endless drivel about Harry's emotional state and Hagrid's ancestry, but not once did she explore the deeper corruption in the tournament. Her power to influence the public was immense, yet she chose sensationalism over substance. The Daily Prophet became a weapon of distraction. Truth was not profitable, fear was. And so the public remained in ignorance, softened by propaganda, while dark magic stirred beneath their feet. The students themselves were more perceptive than their elders. Hermione Granger saw patterns in behavior that adults ignored. She questioned authority, tracked Barty Crouch's odd appearances, and remained suspicious of Moody even when others praised him. It is telling that the truth was first suspected by teenagers. Children were closer to the truth than the Ministry. "Honestly, am I the only person who's ever bothered to read Hogwarts, a history?" Hermione asked once. Her curiosity, while often dismissed as pedantic, was closer to the spirit of vigilance than any formal investigation undertaken by adult wizards. It was also Hermione who discovered Rita Skeeter's secret as an unregistered animagus, a beetle spying on conversations, collecting secrets. Ironically, if Skeeter had turned her gaze toward the strange happenings of the tournament with the same intensity, she might have exposed the conspiracy before the final task. But she didn't. The press could have saved lives. It chose instead to mock a boy in pain. The most poignant moment comes with Cedric's death. "Kill the spare," Voldemort ordered, and Cedric's body fell without honor, without preparation. A champion reduced to collateral damage in a game orchestrated by cruelty. That death was not just a tragedy, it was proof. A student died in school under the noses of a headmaster, teachers, ministry officials, and visiting delegations. No spell can excuse that, no ritual can mask it. Cedric's grave was the gravestone of institutional failure. When Harry returned with Cedric's body, he brought not just a corpse, but a prophecy fulfilled. Voldemort had returned. The ritual in the graveyard had succeeded. Harry described it all, how the Dark Lord used his blood, how he rose from the cauldron reborn. And still the adults argued. Fudge's refusal to acknowledge the truth allowed Voldemort to disappear into the shadows. That denial cost many lives in the following year. One must ask, was it disbelief or cowardice? Did they fail to suspect Voldemort because the truth was too horrible to face? Denial became comfort, and comfort became blindness. The logic of the tournament was broken from the start. A boy's name in a cup should have triggered a full-scale investigation. A missing ministry official should have sparked alarms. A student's death should have shattered the facade. But none of it was enough until it was too late. The wizarding world did not fall in one moment. It fell through a series of decisions made in fear and maintained in pride. The Triwizard tournament should have been a celebration. Instead, it was a funeral procession with cheering crowds and blindfolded judges. Voldemort didn't return in secret. He walked down the red carpet they unknowingly laid for him. The logic of the Triwizard tournament collapses under scrutiny. It is a story of adults ignoring children, power ignoring truth, and comfort ignoring danger. And it is a reminder that evil does not always shout. It often whispers, walks in disguise, and waits for good men to look the other way. Number 23. No anti-interference protections on the maze. The Triwizard tournament was never meant to be safe. That much was clear from the beginning. Designed to test skill, courage, and magical prowess, it was an event soaked in ancient tradition and reawakened with the blood of dragons, the chill of merfolk, and finally, the darkness of a living labyrinth. But while danger was expected, what went unnoticed, or worse, unaddressed, was the tournament's glaring vulnerability. The third task, the grand culmination, was left astonishingly unprotected from outside interference. The maze, built on the Hogwarts Quidditch pitch, was supposed to be the most challenging trial of all. A living organism of hedges and enchantments, it promised to twist, trap, and terrify its entrants into proving their worth. And yet, beneath its shifting walls and aggressive flora, a different kind of threat lay hidden, one not conjured by spells or summoned creatures, but by human deception. The very idea that this climactic challenge was not warded against manipulation undermines the entire integrity of the tournament. Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Alastor Mad-Eye Moody through the use of Polyjuice Potion, managed to tamper with the maze's enchantments without raising suspicion. He did not sneak in under cover of night or break past defensive barriers. He did it in plain sight, under the guise of a trusted authority. This alone calls into question the supposed security measures in place. How could a magical contest of such prestige, watched by international delegations and presided over by figures like Dumbledore and Barty Crouch Sr., be so easy to infiltrate? What's more unsettling is that Crouch Jr. did not simply nudge the odds in Harry Potter's favor. He took direct control over the outcome of the task. As revealed in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, He put the imperious curse on Crumb, forcing him to attack Fleur Delacour. This act of sabotage wasn't merely cheating, it was dangerous and criminal. Yet there is no indication that the maze had protections to alert judges or observers of such a gross violation. If a student under the imperious curse could roam the labyrinth, what else could have gone unnoticed? The cup itself, the supposed goal of the task, was turned into a portkey by Crouch Jr. This required not just high-level magic, but time, access, and opportunity. He admits as much during his confession in Dumbledore's office. "I had to be sure the cup would take whoever touched it straight to the graveyard," he says. Not only was this an act of dark magic, but it was also one of precise interference with a tournament artifact. Again, where were the safeguards? Where were the spells that should have prevented unauthorized enchantments on such a pivotal object? This failure of oversight is baffling. The Triwizard tournament had previously been discontinued due to the deaths of students. It was only revived with the promise of new safety protocols. And yet not only was a Death Eater able to act freely, but no one even suspected foul play until it was too late. The magical community was assured that this would be a fair, modernized contest. But what unfolded was chaos draped in legitimacy. One might argue that the impersonation of Moody was too perfect to detect. But Hogwarts is a school filled with portraits, ghosts, enchanted maps, and truth-telling potions. The Marauder's map, which Harry possesses, literally shows names and locations of everyone in the castle. Had any adult thought to use it, they would have seen 2 Barty Crouches walking the grounds. And yet, no one did. No one questioned Moody's increasingly erratic behavior. No one questioned why he was so invested in helping one champion. The comparison to an Olympic judge slipping steroids to a favored athlete is not far-fetched. This wasn't favoritism, it was premeditated corruption. What's worse is that the other judges, Ludo Bagman, Barty Crouch Sr., before his disappearance, and even Dumbledore, seemed oblivious. Surely there should have been magical protocols in place to monitor tampering, some kind of magical signature detector, or perhaps a neutral, third-party enchantment cast over the cup to prevent outside spells. But no such measures are ever mentioned. Hogwarts itself is layered in protections. Rooms are unplottable. Secret passageways seal themselves. The room of requirement appears only when needed, and yet the labyrinth, built for one of the most dangerous school events in history, was seemingly left as an open canvas for sabotage. Even basic surveillance spells would have picked up anomalies. A magical eye in the sky, a simple enchantment to detect foreign curses. These were not implemented, or if they were laughably ineffective. The entire point of the third task was to test the champions unaided. In the first task, they could not receive outside help. In the second, they were limited by time and magical items. But the maze was a free-for-all, not just for the students, but apparently for any adult with ulterior motives. The rulebook was not just bent, it was shattered, and no one raised the alarm until Cedric Diggory was dead and Harry had returned clutching a corpse. When Harry emerges from the maze, screaming, clutching Cedric's body, it is not just a moment of grief, it is an indictment of the system. Dumbledore is horrified, the crowd is confused, but in hindsight, it should have never come to this. Crouch Jr.'s ability to enchant the cup, curse Crumb, and manipulate the hedges to slow Fleur, all without detection, reveals an uncomfortable truth. No one was watching. There is a moment in Goblet of Fire that illustrates this vividly. When Harry and Cedric both touch the cup, it happens in full view of the crowd. There are cheers, a brief moment of triumph, then silence. They vanish. No alarm is triggered, no judge reacts with concern. The cup, clearly enchanted beyond its original purpose, performs its dark task flawlessly. If the Triwizard Cup had truly been under secure magical protections, its transformation into a portkey would have failed or triggered immediate alerts. The contrast with earlier protections is stark. During the Yule Ball, teachers patrol corridors. During the Dragon Task, strict observation is enforced, but the maze, it is intentionally cut off. Magical fogs and barriers prevent observers from seeing what is happening inside. And yet there is no indication that a monitoring system was substituted. The judges willingly blinded themselves to the task's inner workings, and that blindness enabled murder. What's even more astonishing is that no countermeasures are ever referenced afterward. Dumbledore, in his speech after Cedric's death, acknowledges Voldemort's return. He praises Cedric's bravery, but there is no mention of changes to tournament protocols, no reflection on the system's failure to detect an imposter. The maze, in all its grandeur, remains a symbol of magical failure, a stage for one of Voldemort's cruelest games. The lack of investigation is also troubling. Once the truth is uncovered that Crouch Jr. orchestrated everything, there is no inquiry into how he managed such feats. Fudge refuses to believe it, yes, but what about the others? What about the international wizarding community? Surely Fleur and Crumb's schools would have demanded answers. Their students were placed in a rigged contest. But the narrative moves swiftly on, brushing over the implications. And perhaps that's the greatest flaw of all. The third task, which should have been the crown jewel of magical competition, became a murder scene. Yet instead of reform, we get denial. The World Cup just weeks earlier had descended into panic with the Death Eater attack. The Triwizard tournament, instead of restoring trust, only deepened the cracks, and yet no one demands accountability for a task that could have been easily protected. Imagine a different version of events, one where the hedges themselves carried protective enchantments, rejecting any external spell not authorized by all judges. One where the cup was checked by multiple experts, sealed with a charm known only to the highest-ranking officials. One where students carried talismans to detect hostile curses or sudden possession. In that version, Cedric Diggory might still be alive. The Triwizard Tournament's revival was meant to symbolize unity. It brought together Beauxbaton, Durmstrang and Hogwarts under a banner of cooperation. But the third task exposed how fragile that unity truly was. It wasn't just a tournament. It became a gateway, literally, to Voldemort's return. And that gateway was left wide open, unguarded, and completely vulnerable. It is tempting to view Crouch Jr. as a lone genius, a master manipulator who simply outwitted the system. But that's only half the story. The other half is systemic negligence. He should not have had the opportunity. He should not have had access. The very idea that a single person could hijack a magical competition and turn it into a trap with no resistance speaks volumes about the failures at every level. In the end, the maze was not a test of magical skill, but a test of how long corruption could remain hidden. And it passed, with flying colours. The third task was not merely sabotaged, it was exposed, not just as flawed, but as fundamentally broken, and the price for that blindness was paid in blood. Cedric's body lying in the grass was the final statement. This wasn't just an accident, it was an avoidable catastrophe. Number 24, no medics, no safety net. It was never a question of whether the Triwizard tournament was dangerous. It was a question of how dangerous, and more importantly, how unprepared the organizers were for that danger. At the heart of the most prestigious magical competition in Europe lies an unsettling oversight, one that becomes more disturbing the deeper we look. Across all three tasks involving dragons, merpeople, and a sinister maze, the absence of healers or emergency responders is more than just an omission. It's an outright dereliction of duty. From the moment the Hungarian horntail unfurled its wings in the first task, smoke hissing from its nostrils and claws scraping the rock, it was obvious that the champions were moments from death at any misstep. The dragon's yellow eyes were fixed upon Harry. It was making no attempt to move, but he could see the tension in its powerful limbs, the neck held taut as a bowstring, the wings half-furled, poised to lash out. That's not a metaphor, that's a lethal apex predator, guarding its eggs, and students, aged 14 to 17, were asked to distract it. One wrong move and we would have seen more than scorched robes. Yet there were no medics stationed at the arena, not a single healer visible when a dragon snapped its jaws a foot from Harry's head. Charlie Weasley and his team of dragon handlers were there, yes, but their job was not to protect the children. It was to keep the dragons from flying off into the forbidden forest, not to rescue an unconscious teenager being burned alive. If Harry had failed to summon his firebolt, what was the contingency plan? The The crowd, which included ministry officials, school heads, and a great many children, would have witnessed a fatality. Was Dumbledore expected to spring from his seat, wand in hand, and save the day? That's not preparation, that's blind hope wrapped in ceremonial robes. The second task took place underwater in the Black Lake, a place described as cold, dark, and full of creatures not known for their friendliness. He saw a flash of white and, looking round, saw the mermaid's face. Dark, almond-shaped eyes, long, greenish hair. The merman held a spear. In this alien environment, the champions were told to find and rescue what they would sorely miss, friends who were bewitched into a magical sleep and tethered underwater. Even Harry, despite his last-minute dose of gillyweed, had no precise idea what awaited him in the depths. And again, there was no mention of medics or magical lifeguards monitoring from the surface, no protective barrier, no charms to prevent drowning. What if a Grindylow had caught Fleur and refused to let go? What if the bubblehead charm failed midway? What if a mermaid panicked and accidentally speared a champion? In a world where magical healing can regrow bones overnight, remember Madame Pomfrey's comment, "Scaligro works, but it's painful." The absence of an on-site medical crew was unconscionable. Fleur was indeed attacked by Grindylows and failed to complete the task. She emerged shaken and humiliated, but what if she hadn't surfaced at all? Would someone have dived in to fetch her lifeless body? The romanticism of the task, with its noble myth of underwater trials and time-limited rescues, masked a chilling reality. Hogwarts gambled with students' lives under the pretense of ancient tradition. Then came the maze, and with it the illusion of control. At first it seemed relatively tame, shrinking paths, disorienting hedges, and mild hexes. But as the champions pushed deeper, the spells grew darker. The maze was enchanted to confuse, separate, and isolate. The maze was growing darker with every step he took. There was something eerie about the towering hedges, the way their leaves rustled as though whispering secrets to each other. In this twisting trap, champions were cut off from the outside world, their screams muffled, their minds subject to illusions and dark magic. Cedric Diggory was almost attacked by a blast-ended Scroot. Harry was subjected to the Cruciatus curse by an impostor, Death Eater. Crumb was imperious and turned into a weapon. And yet, even with champions showing signs of magical tampering, no auras stormed the maze, no mediwizards rushed in. The maze had been bewitched to signal when a champion was in danger, but that was clearly a flawed system. Cedric died before anyone could intervene. What did that enchantment do then? Flash a little red light as a warning that came too late? We know the cup was turned into a portkey, but even if it hadn't been, there was no infrastructure in place to deal with a mental breakdown or a fatal accident. This was not the 1300s. This was a time when Hogwarts had a hospital wing, a highly competent healer in Madame Pomfrey, and access to St. Mungo's. The ministry itself maintained departments for magical accidents and catastrophes. There was no excuse for their absence. It wasn't as though magical injuries were rare. In Harry's second year, Gilderoy Lockhart accidentally removed all the bones from Harry's arm, and Madame Pomfrey had the tools to regrow them. In third year, Sirius Black's attack on Ron resulted in a trip to the hospital wing. Lupin's werewolf condition, cursed injuries, venomous bites, Hogwarts had handled it all. So why was no healer stationed by the stands when dragons were loose or when champions dove into the abyss? We must consider the very nature of magical healing. It is fast, efficient, and often miraculous. Bones regrown, consciousness restored, curses reversed. It's not the same as Muggle medicine, where delays can mean death. This makes the absence of healers at the tournament not only illogical, but absurd. If the magical world prides itself on the ability to recover quickly, then why not have a St. Mungo's trained professional on hand at all times? Even the Quidditch World Cup, known for its rowdy fans and celebratory chaos, had safety enchantments and staff to handle stampedes or firework malfunctions. Yet Hogwarts, hosting an international high-stakes competition, acted as if 3 students perishing was a risk worth taking for the glory of tradition. In fact, the tournament had been cancelled for centuries precisely because it was too dangerous. The Triwizard tournament was discontinued when the death toll mounted too high. That's a direct quote from Professor Binns. So when the decision was made to revive it, wouldn't the obvious response have been to modernize the infrastructure, install safeguards, hire healers? The champions were minors. Cedric was 17, Harry only 14. And Harry, perhaps the unluckiest boy in the magical world, was forced into the tournament against his will. He didn't even want to be there. His participation was coerced through a magical binding contract, and yet he was still subject to the same life-threatening conditions as the others. Shouldn't the ministry have taken extra care to ensure his safety, if not out of morality, then at least for optics? Barty Crouch Sr., blinded by prestige, and Ludo Bagman, lost in his own personal agenda, certainly weren't thinking of student safety. Dumbledore, while often a source of protection, seemed too preoccupied with maintaining the traditions of the event to realize the glaring holes in security and medical support. And when Cedric died, cold, sudden, and pointless, it took a full minute before anyone realized something had gone horribly wrong. That delay wasn't just narrative tension, it was administrative failure. In those crucial moments when Harry reappeared with Cedric's body, he shouted, he's back, Voldemort's back!" And nobody heard because everyone was too busy cheering. That silence, that chaos was a mirror to the entire tournament. Applause instead of protection, spectacle over safety, and let's not forget the bystanders, Cho Chang, the Beauxbatons girls, Fleur's younger sister Gabrielle, all watching from the sidelines as lives were dangled over pits of fire and lakes of ice. The staff of Durmstrang and Beauxbaton didn't protest either. Were they bound by the same reverence to tradition that plagued the British wizarding world? It's almost as if magical society treated trauma as something that could be fixed after the fact. A broken arm? Mend it. A near-death experience? Obliviate it. But emotional trauma doesn't vanish with a wave of a wand. Harry never recovered from the graveyard. He was scarred by the cries of Cedric's ghost and the cold kiss of the Dementor the following year. No emergency healer could patch that. The tournament stands not as a celebration of magical excellence, but as a study in negligence. The lack of emergency response, medical support, or even basic oversight turns a legendary competition into a cautionary tale. For all the marvels the wizarding world can offer, it failed its youth where it mattered most, in care, in foresight, in protection. If we are to ever understand the true cost of that year, we must stop looking at the tasks as chapters in a story and begin seeing them as indictments of magical governance, because when a child dies for glory and no one thought to call a healer, we are no longer reading a fantasy, we are reading a tragedy.